Last night my son-in-law humiliated me in front of everyone. This morning he got a call from bank that left him begging for mercy. Want to know how the tables turned? Don't blink. This story will keep you guessing until the very end. There's something about Sunday nights that always feels a little magical, don't you think? Maybe it's the way the house smells, roast chicken in the oven, a hint of rosemary and garlic wafting through the air, and the faintest trace of my favorite vanilla candle burning on the sideboard. Or maybe it's the way the family trickles in, one by one, each with their own stories, laughter and, let's be honest, a little bit of drama tucked under their arms like a casserole dish. This particular Sunday I'd gone all out. The table was set with my mother's old china, the good silver was polished, and I'd even ironed the tablecloth, which, if you know me, is a rare event reserved for holidays and the occasional peace treaty. Everyone was in good spirits. My daughter, Samantha, was telling a story about her new job, her hands flying in the air as she described her boss's latest antics. My grandson, Logan, was sneaking extra rolls under the table to the dog, who was doing his best impression of a starving orphan. Even my late husband's old friend Walt had stopped by, bringing with him a bottle of red wine and a joke that was probably older than the bottle itself. For once, nobody was arguing about politics, the weather, or whether or not pineapple belongs on pizza. It was, in every sense, a perfect family dinner. I was just about to take a bite of my famous mashed potatoes, creamy, buttery, with just a hint of garlic when it happened. Travis, my son-in-law, who had been unusually quiet all evening, suddenly put down his fork with a clatter. He looked around the table, his eyes landing on me, and with a smirk that could curdle milk, he blurted out, "Is this useless old woman going to eat everything again?" For a moment time seemed to freeze. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, like a knife waiting to fall. Then, as if on cue, the table erupted in laughter. Not the kind of laughter that bubbles up from genuine amusement, but the awkward, uncomfortable kind that people use when they don't know what else to do. Even Samantha, my own daughter, let out a nervous giggle, though she quickly shot me an apologetic look, her cheeks turning pink. I felt my face flush, a hot wave of embarrassment and anger washing over me. My hands, which had been steady moments before, suddenly felt clumsy. I could feel every pair of eyes at the table on me, waiting to see how I would react. For a split second, I considered firing back with a witty retort, something about Travis's inability to change a tie or his questionable taste in Hawaiian shirts. But then I remembered something my mother used to say, "Dignity is silent. Let fools make the noise." So, I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and slowly stood up. I reached for my napkin, dabbed at the corners of my mouth, and whispered, "Excuse me." My voice was calm, almost gentle, but I could see the surprise flicker across Travis's face. He hadn't expected me to walk away. He wanted a reaction, a scene, maybe even a shouting match. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. As I left the table, I caught a glimpse of Travis's smug grin, the kind that said he thought he'd won. Oh, if only he knew what was coming. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor, and slipped into the quiet sanctuary of my bedroom. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the faded photograph of my late husband, Jack, on the nightstand. He'd always been the peacemaker, the one who could diffuse any situation with a joke or a gentle word. I missed him terribly in moments like this. I could almost hear his voice in my head, telling me keep my chin up, to remember who I was. "You're stronger than you think, Evelyn," he used to say. "Don't let anyone make you feel small." I thought about going back to the table, about pretending nothing had happened. But the truth was, I didn't want to. I was tired of being the butt of the joke, tired of biting my tongue, tired of pretending that Travis's little jabs didn't hurt. I'd spent my whole life taking care of this family, putting everyone else's needs before my own. Was it too much to ask for a little respect? I could hear the muffled sounds of conversation drifting down the hallway. The laughter had faded, replaced by the clinking of silverware and the low hum of voices. I wondered if anyone even noticed I was gone. Did they care? Or was I just another piece of furniture, something to be taken for granted until it was gone? I sat there for a long time, lost in thought. Eventually, Samantha knocked softly on the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, are you okay?" I took another deep breath, smoothed my skirt, and opened the door. She looked at me with wide, worried eyes, and for a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees and tangled hair. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, giving her a reassuring smile. "Just needed a moment." She nodded, biting her lip, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that she didn't have to carry the weight of Travis's words. But I also knew that some lessons had to be learned the hard way. As I walked back to the dining room, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Travis, define my worth. Took my seat at the table, picked up my fork, and smiled. The rest of the meal passed in a blur, but I held my head high, refusing to let his words ruin my night. And as I looked around the table at the people I loved, I made a silent promise to myself: things were going to change. Maybe not tonight, maybe not even tomorrow, but soon. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one you should never underestimate. So, let me ask you, have you ever wanted to just drop the mic at a family dinner? What would you have done in my shoes? That night, as the house finally settled into silence, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the streetlight outside dancing across the familiar cracks in the plaster. The laughter from dinner still echoed in my ears, but now it sounded hollow, like a joke that had gone on too long. I replayed the scene over and over, each time wishing I'd said something clever, something that would have put Travis in his place. But then I remembered what my late husband Jack used to say whenever someone tried to drag him into a pointless argument: never wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty, but the pig likes it. Jack had always been the wise one, the calm in the storm, and I could almost hear his voice, gentle and steady, reminding me that dignity was worth more than the fleeting satisfaction of a sharp retort. So I decided to let karma do the talking. But as I lay there, the moonlight creeping across the quilt we'd picked out together all those years ago, I realized that sometimes karma needs a little nudge. I started thinking about all the things Travis didn't know, all the ways he'd underestimated me. For starters, the house he and Samantha lived in, the one he liked to show off to his friends, boasting about the smart investment he'd made, was still in my name. When Jack passed, he left everything to me, and though I'd always intended to sign it over to Samantha when the time was right, I'd never quite gotten around to it. Life has a way of distracting you, doesn't it? And then there was the business loan Travis had taken out last year, the one he'd begged me to co-sign for because the bank wouldn't give him the time of day on his own. I'd agreed, mostly for Samantha's sake, but I'd kept a close eye on the paperwork, making sure my name was on every dotted line. Travis, of course, had no idea just how much power I still held over his little empire. As I lay there, a slow smile crept across my face. Maybe it was time to stop being the one who always smoothed things over and kept the peace, even when it meant swallowing my pride. Ever wonder what would happen if you just stopped being the nice one? I did. I thought about all the times I'd let things slide, all the little slights and jabs I'd ignored for the sake of family harmony. I thought about the way Travis strutted around, acting like he was king of the castle, never once stopping to consider who actually owned the castle. I thought about Samantha, too, my sweet, stubborn girl, who'd always tried to keep the peace between her husband and her mother, never realizing that sometimes peace comes at too high a price. I wondered what she'd say if she knew just how close they were to losing everything. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was done playing the role of the quiet, accommodating mother-in-law. I'd spent my whole life putting others first, making sure everyone else was comfortable, even if it meant sacrificing my own happiness. But tonight, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the sting of Travis's words, or maybe it was the memory of Jack's quiet strength. But I knew I couldn't let this go. I got up and padded down the hallway in my slippers, careful not to wake anyone. I found the folder with all the house documents and the loan papers, running my fingers over the embossed seal, the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Travis had humiliated me just hours before, and I started making a list. Not a list of grievances, though I could have filled a notebook with those, but a list of options. What could I do to remind Travis, and maybe even Samantha, that respect isn't just a word you toss around when it's convenient? I could call the bank in the morning, ask them to review the terms of the loan. I could remind Travis that the house wasn't his to mortgage or refinance without my say-so. I could even, if I was feeling particularly bold, start the process of transferring the house to Samantha alone, cutting Travis out entirely. The possibilities were endless, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of excitement, a sense of control I hadn't felt since Jack was alive. I poured myself a cup of tea, the steam curling up in the dim light, and let myself imagine a future where I wasn't just the background character in my own story. I thought about all the women I knew, friends, neighbors, even my own mother, who'd spent their lives making themselves small so others could feel big. I wondered how many of them had ever stopped to ask, what if I just stopped being the nice one? The thought made me laugh, a low, quiet chuckle that felt good in my chest. I finished my tea, put the papers back in the folder, and went back to bed, feeling lighter than I had in years. As I drifted off to sleep, I knew that tomorrow would be different. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for certain. Travis was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally get the respect I deserved, not just from him but from everyone at that table. Because sometimes, the quiet before the storm is just the universe giving you a moment to gather your strength. And I was ready. The sun was barely up when I shuffled into the kitchen, the house still quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft patter of rain against the window. I poured myself a cup of coffee, savoring the rich aroma, and cut a generous slice of the apple pie I'd hidden away from last night's dinner. Yes, Travis, I did eat it all, and I didn't feel the least bit guilty. I sat at the table, the same one where I'd been humiliated just hours before, and let the warmth of the coffee and the sweetness of the pie remind me that small pleasures are sometimes the best revenge. I was just about to open the morning paper when the phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the peaceful silence. I hesitated for a moment, wondering who could be calling so early, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Hello, this is Evelyn," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. On the other end, a polite but businesslike voice introduced herself as Linda from the bank. She explained, in that careful way bankers have, that there had been a request to refinance the mortgage on the house, my house, the one Travis and Samantha lived in. Apparently, Travis had submitted the paperwork, listing himself as the primary contact, but since the deed was still in my name, they needed my approval to move forward. I could almost picture Travis sitting in some office, smugly assuming I'd just sign whatever he put in front of me, never imagining I'd have the nerve to say no. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. "No, I do not approve," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. "In fact, I'd like to review all accounts under my name, please." There was a brief pause on the other end, as if Linda was surprised by my decisiveness, but she quickly assured me that she would put a hold on the refinancing process and send over the necessary documents for my review. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and sat back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt powerful, like I was finally steering my own ship instead of just being a passenger. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I made another cup of coffee, tidied up the kitchen, and even took a few minutes to sit by the window and watch the rain. I thought about all the years I'd spent putting everyone else first, about all the times I'd let Travis's little dig slide for the sake of family harmony. Not today. Today I was done being the nice one. Around noon, I heard the unmistakable sound of Travis's car screeching into the driveway, followed by the slam of the front door. He stormed into the living room, his face pale and drawn, eyes wide with panic. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at me as if he'd never really seen me before. "Evelyn, what did you do?" he demanded, his voice trembling. I set down my knitting and looked him square in the eye. "I did what any responsible homeowner would do," I replied, my tone even. "I protected my assets." He started pacing, running his hands through his hair, muttering about business deals and deadlines and how everything was about to fall apart. I almost felt sorry for him, almost. But then I remembered the way he'd laughed at me last night, the way he'd made me feel small in my own home, and any sympathy I might have had evaporated. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "I need that money. I have a deal on the line. If I can't close, I'll lose everything." I shrugged, feigning innocence. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to go behind my back." He stopped pacing and stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For a moment, I almost expected him to apologize, to admit he'd been wrong, but instead he just shook his head and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I hadn't wanted things to come to this, but I knew it was necessary. Sometimes you have to draw a line in the sand, even if it means upsetting the people you love. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of phone calls and paperwork. The bank sent over the documents for me to review, and I spent the afternoon going through them with a fine-tooth comb, making sure every was dotted and every crossed. I called Samantha, too, and explained what had happened. She was quiet at first, but then she sighed and said, I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stood up for you last night. I told her it was all right, that we all make mistakes, but I could hear the relief in her voice when I assured her that the house wasn't going anywhere. By the time the sun set, I was exhausted but strangely exhilarated. Isn't it thrilling when the tables turn? Who says life after 50 can't be full of surprises? I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch watching the rain finally give way to a soft, golden sunset. I thought about all the women I knew who'd been told they were too old, or too soft, or too nice to stand up for themselves. I wished I could tell them what I'd learned, that it's never too late to take control of your own story, to remind the world, and yourself, that you're not to be underestimated. As the sky faded from gold to deep blue, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Travis's plans might be in shambles, but for the first time in a long time, mine were just beginning. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the house settled into that familiar hush, Travis finally mustered the courage to face me. I was in the kitchen, humming to myself as I wiped down the counters, when I heard the tentative shuffle of his feet in the doorway. He looked nothing like the smug, self-assured man from the night before. Instead, he seemed smaller, almost boyish, his shoulders hunched and his eyes darting nervously around the room. He cleared his throat, fiddled with the hem of his shirt, and stammered out an apology that was as awkward as it was overdue. "Evelyn, I'm sorry for what I said last night. I shouldn't have, I didn't mean." He trailed off, his cheeks flushed, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He even offered to make dinner, which, let's be honest, was a bigger threat than his insults. This is a man who once burned water trying to make instant noodles. I let him sweat for a moment, watching him twist himself into knots, before I finally set down my dish towel and looked him square in the eye. "Travis," I said, my voice calm but firm, "respect isn't just for show. It's for every day, every meal, every moment. You don't get to pick and choose when to be decent to people, especially not the ones who've done nothing but support you." He nodded, swallowing hard, and I could see the lesson sinking in. It wasn't just about the house or the loan or even the pie. It was about dignity, about the quiet strength that comes from a lifetime of holding families together, of weathering storms and patching up wounds, of being the backbone when everyone else is too busy or too proud to notice. That week, the whole family seemed to move a little differently. Samantha was more attentive, checking in on me with cups of tea and gentle hugs. Logan, my sweet grandson, drew me a picture of our house with a big heart over it and taped it to the fridge. Even Walt, who'd witnessed the whole debacle, stopped by with a bouquet of daisies and a wink, telling me, "You showed him, Evelyn." But the biggest change was in Travis. He started helping out around the house, fixing the leaky faucet in the bathroom and mowing the lawn without being asked. He even sat with me one afternoon, asking for advice about his business, genuinely listening for the first time instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. It wasn't a complete transformation, old habits die hard, but it was a start. And as for me, I found a new sense of peace, a quiet confidence that had been missing for far too long. At our next family dinner, I took my rightful place at the head of the table, the good china gleaming and the roast cooked to perfection. The conversation was lively, the laughter genuine, and for once, there was no tension simmering beneath the surface. I looked around at the faces I loved, my daughter, my grandson, even Travis, who was now careful to pass me the mashed potatoes with a respectful smile, and I felt a deep, abiding sense of satisfaction. I'd spent so many years making myself small, trying not to rock the boat, but now I realized that sometimes the boat needs a good shake. And yes, when dessert was served, I made sure to take the last piece of pie, savoring every bite as the family watched with grins and playful groans. Call it poetic justice, or maybe just a well-earned treat, but it tasted sweeter than ever. As the evening wound down and the dishes were cleared, I caught Samantha's eye across the table. She mouthed a simple, "Thank you," and I knew she meant more than just for dinner. She was grateful for the lesson, for the reminder that strength doesn't always roar, it can be quiet, steady, and unyielding. Later, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the cool night air brushing against my skin, I thought about all the women like me who've been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. I wished I could tell them what I'd learned, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand the respect you deserve, and to take the last piece of pie without apology. Life after 50 isn't about fading into the background. It's about stepping into your power, embracing your wisdom, and reminding everyone, including yourself, that you are the heart of the family, the keeper of the stories, and the one who decides when enough is enough. So here's to all the houseless old women out there. May we never forget our worth. May we always find our voice, and may we never, ever let anyone else eat the last piece of pie. So, ladies, what would you have done? Have you ever had to remind your family who's really in charge? Drop your stories in the comments, I'd love to hear them. And if you enjoyed this tale of sweet revenge and second chances, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power, wisdom, and humor of women like us. Because let's face it, we're just getting started.